Welcome to Walking with Jesus Bible Study. We're going to be in the book of Romans, chapter 8, verses 3 and 4. Verse 3. For what the law could not do in that it was weak through the flesh, God sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, condoned sin in the flesh. Verse 4. That the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. And I'll repeat those. 3. For what the law could not do in that it was weak through the flesh, God sending his Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh. Verse 4. That the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. The law of Moses was not able to redeem us. It simply served to show us how fallen our state was and how incapable we were of attaining right standing with God. In our own power, when Christ resurrected, a new order came in, which was the law of the Spirit of life. We are not led by the inscriptions of stone tablets anymore, but we are led by the Spirit of the living God. Now, even though when Jesus came, he's not totally dismantling the law, or the Mosaic law, as they like to call it, the law of Moses. In fact, he just perfected it. He modernized it for the time that is such as it was then, and for the future times. Here's the thing: when we go to preach, a lot of churches and a lot of people are only reading the New Testament, which is great because it talks about Jesus and how it came about and what he came here to do. But we got to have balance in our studies. We got to have balance in our preaching. We got to have balance in our sharing of the gospel. So that's very important, that we preach Jesus' gospel, where we cannot forget about God's whole story. See, there's two sides of the story. You got the Old Testament and the New Testament. And you can't tell God's story without telling both sides. See, when you only preach the New Testament, it's just painted that God is this hippie person who brought Jesus to be given all love and forgiveness. And so that's where people are thinking it's okay. And they're being too kind to everybody. And they're allowing this to go on. And they're allowing this, and they're accepting this because God is a God of love. And he says to love everybody. And they're misinterpreting the whole story of God's story. But when you get into the Old Testament, the God of war, the God of wrath, the God that demands respect, the God that don't play, the God that is not going to tolerate your crap. And that's where the balance comes in. That's why you got to remember to do both. You can't have one without the other. And this is where people is falling short and teaching and spreading God's gospel to everybody. And things getting all twisted. Yes, there's some things that are in the Old Testament, that people's like, oh, well, that was harsher times. If you was to actually read the stories, some of the stories they're saying that God commanded to do is not nothing that God commanded to do. Those were things that people were doing themselves, like slavery. They was already doing that self because people are evil. People are the ones who created evil. Nowhere did he command people to do that. Nowhere did he say it was law. In fact, all he did, through most of the time, was he got people away from slavery. He took people out of Egypt from the slavery. And it says, oh, and then God, he has soldier daughters. No, he says, so for those people who have done that. In fact, in the very early beginning, before you even get to that, you had people in Deuteronomy, I think even in Numbers. He even made a law that says every 7 years, Any man that is a manservant or a maidservant unto you, you must set free. You must let go. Any person that owed you money, you must allow it to go. And that is why if you go closely and look into the actual law, this law that we live under, the government law, every 7 years, you're supposed to be forgiven of your debts. If you ever wonder why after 7 years certain things have disappeared, now they start sticking to that law, I don't know, but they're supposed to. And I'm pretty sure you might could take them to court, because if they could uphold the other laws, the laws of thou shalt not kill and thou shalt murder in the court of law, even if they don't want to put God in there, then if they want to obey those laws from the law of God, then they got to obey those laws from the law of God, which is in the book, and which they did apply and did use and was going up until the past couple of years, as far as I know. So you got to make sure you read everything. You can't just go off what people told. And you can't just go because it was said in the Bible that God said it. Paul said a lot of things that did not come out of God's mouth. Jezebel even has some words in there where things came out of her mouth, but it's not what God said. It's not what God commanded. Are we going to send it around and start repeating the things that Jezebel said and start, oh, well, it was in the Bible. We have to do it. God commanded. You see how dumb that sounds? So you cannot take everything that you read in the Bible and turn around and tell somebody and say that God said to do that. You better make sure that it came out of God's mouth. You can't repeat everything and tell everybody that God said it. There's like people out there that's telling them, oh, God gave me a word. It came from God. How do we know it came from God? You could have just been listening to those voices inside your head. And some of those people who are saying that God said it, did we look at the fruit of their tree? Are they lined up with what's in the book? Because you could back up anything that comes out of God's mouth with the word. And you can tell if somebody's a false prophet or not by the fruit that they bear. Start paying attention to how they actually living. Are they backing up with their preaching? Is their lifestyle reflecting? When you look at them, do you see a reflection of Christ? Because any true person that has a real close relationship with God, when you look at them, they should reflect Christ all around them. Their light should be so bright that all you see is their bright light, that you almost can't stand to look at them. That's how you're supposed to know. It says so in the Bible. But you got people out there that's just getting up there and just, oh, yeah, I do this and that. And, they just repeating what they say. They just repeating the videos that they have watched. They watch other people. And instead of experiencing that themselves and going through themselves, they're repeating what they see. They're repeating what other people say. And we all know what happens when you repeat things. It never gets told the same way it was told. Especially when it's somebody's just copying off somebody. It's never going to be the same. That's why it's called a copy. You'll be able to tell the difference. Because it's not the original. There's people who speak so much and use the Holy Spirit, they don't even realize what they say. They need to pay attention to go back and pay attention to what they said out their mouth. They need to practice what they preach. Because they got to remember, it's not them that's speaking. It's the Holy Spirit that's speaking. That's why I try to even make sure and I don't do it all the time, but I need to go back and watch some of the things that I have sit here and said. Because we're all learning. We're all learning this together. This isn't stuff that I'm sitting here writing down and telling you these are my thoughts. No, I say a prayer and ask God to guide my mouth, guide my Holy Spirit so I speak the truth, so that you get your message out that you want to send out to the people. This isn't my message, this is God's message with my mouth. So it ain't gonna sound like God's words because I don't talk like God. But it's His message. And if I'm wrong and I get it wrong, God will show me. On some of the things, like, I may have, I did some Googling myself to see what Jesus' birthday was. And I looked up, this astronomer does it, but there's a lot of people that say he was born in March and some say in April. I got June 17th. I don't know. Could I be wrong? Yes. But that wasn't the Holy Spirit speaking for me. That was just me looking up stuff. It's different than me relaying this message right here. That's why it's important for you to have a relationship with God.